Hello and welcome to the Tolly Folly podcast, a limited series podcast where we talk about things that are a bit tolly and sometimes folly. I am Sujoy, your host for this episode, and I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts Amrita and Beth. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Sujoy.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Beth. So this is episode number 2, and we received quite a lot of feedback for our first episode that was on Ogniparikha and Samapti, and we also talked about Choti Si Mulakat. If you haven't checked it out, please do on the U Podcasting stream on all major podcasting platforms or on YouTube. You can search for Tolly Folly. And on episode 2, we will continue with the Uttam Suchitra movie series, and we have 30 movies to choose from, and we will be chatting and discussing about possibly 2 of the most obvious choices on that list. Saptapadi, the 1961 film directed by Ajoy Kaur, and Chaowa Pawa, made in 1959, directed by Sachin Mukherjee, Dilip Mukherjee, Tarun Majumdar, aka Jatrik. So, let's begin with Saptapadi. And before we start discussing the specifics about the movie, Amrita, over to you for the plot synopsis.
Okay, so Saptapadi is a 1961 film starring Uttam Suchitra as a young interfaith couple caught up in the social changes transforming India in the 1940s as the country moves from the days of empire to independence. At a deeper level, you could say that it's about the freedom of the individual in a culture that doesn't really understand the concept, against the background of a country that seeks freedom. So, the country wants freedom, but the individual, what about their freedoms? In the movie, Uttam plays this young atheist medical student from a conservative Bengali Hindu family, who falls for this spitfire Anglo-Indian woman played by Suchitra. And there are religious differences. Her dad wants him to convert to Christianity. Her dad's white, by the way. And Uttam's dad just doesn't want this marriage because she's half white and she's Christian. So then the two of them are separated because Suchitra is really troubled by her father's demand that Uttam convert to Christianity. And also his dad shows up and leans on the emotional manipulation. So the two of them part ways. And then years later, we see Uttam, who is now a priest and also a doctor, and he finds Suchitra passed out drunk in a military hospital at the tail end of the war. And most of the movie is told in flashback as he remembers their relationship and how they met and fell in love and were separated. And kind of thinking about how they arrived at this point.
So, and I think the question rises when we were choosing this movie is from the 30 movies that we have to choose from Uttam Suchitra's long list of filmography, Saptapadi stands out as one of the classics. People consider it as a classic. And do you have any, after having seen it in 2020, does it come across as a classic?
I'll let Beth go first.
Yeah.
A lot of what I have to say about this movie is informed by, if Assam were here, he would put on his monocle, because I have read this really interesting, very academic book on Bengali cinema called Bengali Cinema and Other Nation, spelled A-N space Other Nation, by, I apologize for my pronunciation, Sharmishta Guptu, that came out in 2010. And this film is discussed quite a bit in that book, of course. And she makes some points about how this, like Amrita was saying, this film in particular, but their pairing overall as its own genre, or micro-genre anyway, really speak to the tension between traditional and modern as India becomes independent, and Bengal in particular is wrangling with, as we talked about a little bit last week, the sort of burden of Anglicization, and what that's going to look like for them in a new era, and with the refugee crisis in Bengal as well, which is not discussed in this movie, but is obviously a background of the time period that this is set in and of the time period that these films emerge in. my understanding from this book is that these two, as a romantic pair, really speak to trying to have both tradition and modernity. Modernity being represented primarily as romantic love, and that the two characters go through an emotional and sort of idealistic crisis in most of their films, often represented medically with mental health and other medical issues. And they have to make ethical decisions before they can be fully united and, sort of represent a way forward. So I think it must be a lot of those things that are really speaking to the mainstream Bengali audience in a very significant way, in a way also that Hindi films don't. So Bengal had a need for its own, its own stories, its own faces, its own language, its own music, and all those kinds of things that people who know a lot more than I do can tell us about. But that's the understanding I'm getting from my reading.
What do you think, Amrita?
I understand the arguments that Beth was talking about from the film. From the book, and I can see that in this film, and in the films that we saw for the last episode as well. That push-pull against modernity, that's very central to this movie as well. But I honestly think the reason why this is a classic is really centered on the chemistry between Uttam and Suchitra. I think if you didn't have that chemistry between the two of them, if you didn't have Uttam and Suchitra play such idealized versions of the Bengali man and the Bengali woman, even though she's playing, an Anglo-Indian in this film, but she's just so beautiful and she's so sassy in this film. At least, even when she's in the second part where she's playing this sort of hopeless drunk, she is just so beautiful, and she's so tragic in this particularly melodramatic, elegant way that I think a great number of film cultures really appreciated. And I think Bengali cinema in particular really appreciated that kind of elegant suffering. And these two really pull it off. There's nobody who pulls off elegant suffering better than these two. And I say that having watched Soumitra do his thing, which is amazing as well. But the two of them together, I've seen them in suffering in other films and they're very effective, but when they're together, they're just this supernova of pleasurable pain, and I think that's
cinematic, elegant pleasure suffering.
Exactly. It just draws the audience in, I think, and it gets you really emotionally involved with these two and their suffering, and I think that's what people remember, even if they don't remember what actually happened in the film. Because I've seen this film, I'll speak for myself, but I've seen this film a few times and I never remember what happened in the film, because every time I go back to it, I remember certain things, but the giant bits of this film where I'm just wait, did that happen? I don't remember that happening. And I say that every single time. And it's not that I have a particularly bad memory. It's just that you're so caught up in the emotions of this film and the flow of it that it becomes almost immaterial, what are the specifics of that suffering. And I feel that has a great deal to do with why this movie is considered a classic, because it can't be the story itself, because the story itself is kind of terrible.
It kind of draws you in, right? We don't even know the backstory yet, and the opening shot is just for, when these two characters meet for the first time in the movie's chronology, it's 4 still shots. He's holding her. There's a wide shot. He's got a handful of water that he's splashing on her face, and it's just her wet, unconscious face. Just those 4 frames just convey so much drama into the frames. It's beautiful, and you are absolutely drawn by their on-screen chemistry, as you said, the elegant suffering of Uttam Suchitra. That's a key word. My theory is other than the obvious sparkling chemistry between these two, I don't think Indian cinema has many classics in in the way that the Hollywood wartime romance has, like Casablanca or Dr. Zhivago or Gone with the Wind. And this is probably the closest that comes to fill that void. And also the replayability of that song, Tobe Kemon Hoto, that kind of keeps it going for generations to rewatch it, even if so in fragments. And that's why Saptapadi continues to be a classic, even though, as we said, like the story itself isn't that really significantly entertaining or great.
I don't think you tend to see movies with an Anglo-Indian lead all that often, especially one who's Christian, right? I feel like that's fairly unusual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we are used to religious, people, a romantic pair comes from different religious backgrounds, but this is not the pairing that we usually get. So that's kind of different. And I think, I assume that because it was a former capital, Calcutta in particular has sort of cultural or angst around Anglo-Indians, right? That maybe other parts of India have less so, and in different ways, obviously. And also this movie has, we talked about this last week too, the freedom from parents in a kind of a different way, and that the way the parents are sort of disposed of in different ways that we can talk about more. And then of course you get another convenient coincidence when we learn a little bit more about her parents with a nice mid-film reveal.
Oh yeah.
But I think also another feature that we have to talk about is the song on the motorcycle. You cannot read about 50s Bengali cinema without seeing an image of this, or early 60s, without seeing an image of this song. You can, even if you don't hear the song, you see a shot of them on the motorcycle, which is the header image that Sujoy made for our podcast series. Like, that alone is iconic.
It's as iconic as it gets, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's as iconic as, Apu holding his son on his shoulders at the end of Upper Sansar, this is the coupling image that you see. It's the Raj Kapoor holding the swooning Nargis of Bengali cinema.
RK Films logo, yeah, definitely. Yeah. But how reckless was that driving shot, though, in the white shot when it's like the stunt drivers doing the act. It was so reckless. I was so fearful for stunt woman Suchitra. The flashback takes us back to their days in medical college when they're studying, and they are doing everything else but studying. They are playing mixed doubles tennis. They're playing football.
Do not seek medical care from these people.
It's wartime, so,
Yeah, needs must.
But what are your thoughts about the extracurricular activities that they are doing, including the Othello play?
I love these. It establishes a youthfulness that obviously is in contrast to the older, grizzled, wartime, bearded, drunken when we first meet them. So that football match in the beginning, again, like when we were talking about Sajan, and I was like, awesome, you just haven't seen enough Bengali movies to know that football is a thing in movies. This is the one I was thinking about. But her screaming on that football field is just amazing to me.
Clayton!
The way she looks is such a big deal, because before we've almost always seen her with long hair in a sari, and here she's wearing like a button-up shirt and a skirt, and she has her hair in a ponytail, and she's had a haircut for this film, and she's so vicious and vehement, and again it draws you in.
Just on that point on Asim tweeted today that before we started talking about Uttam Suchitra, he thought Uttam Suchitra is just one person. That is so on brand, Asim. Oh dear. That Asim incident reminded me of some filmy story about Ismail Darbar, and he took his assistant to a recording studio, and the T-series guy just kept talking to both of them as one person, and he kept addressing one guy as Ismail, the other guy as Darbar. At the end of the conversation, Ismail Darbar says, like, I am Ismail, I am Darbar as well. But coming back to Saptapadi, Amrita, were you impressed by Uttam Kumar's Othello?
So I can't discuss the Othello thing without discussing the race aspect of this film. Like, not to harsh everybody's mellow, but like, it's so odd, watching the tone of the racial politics in this film.
I mean, there is no subtlety in this.
No.
He upfront calls him Blackie.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like, she's like, Blackie, Blackie, Blackie. And then, like, I saw this movie without subs, and my Bengali is sort of like so-so. But I think, like, he quips back to her, like, don't call me Blackie. There's only one Blackie for us Bengalis, and that's Kalima. And I started laughing because I was like, what? What the heck kind of retort is that?
It's very era-appropriate. That's all I can say.
I like sitting here in like 2020 and like listening to that entire exchange. I'm just like, what is happening? Like, who, like, what? But also, like,
that's pretty much my reaction to the entire movie, to be honest.
But like, there's just so many different things. Like, I have all these notes where I'm just like cataloging all her insults to him, where she's like, you gunda, you brute, God will punish you. And he's just like, well, God can't punish me because I'm an atheist. Ha ha ha. And I'm just like, I don't understand anything in this movie. There's a staging of Othello in the middle of this movie that just comes very abruptly for no good reason. And apparently they're staging it without ever having practiced it. Like, they've literally never gone to practice for it, but they're just like, hey, impromptu Othello.
No. So they have been rehearsing, but Clayton chickens out because he can't remember the lines. And then the director of the play, he's been searching for a replacement on the day of the staging. And he's like, Krishnendu, you are the guy. Yeah, and he puts on the black makeup after that.
Makes no sense. But like, by the way, Uttam Kumar is a Bengali, and I'm not saying that he is particularly dark-skinned, but he could have played this role without blacking up his face. Like, it was perfectly fine for him to do this role without blackface, but
it's probably perfectly fine for anyone to do this role without blackface.
Yeah, pretty much. But I'm just saying, Othello was a Moor, and like Indians and Moors, like, we're fine. Like, we don't need to like put on blackface to play Moors.
I mean, Ajay Devgan did it without anything,
But, and this is, by the way, not the first time, or maybe not the last time that Uttam Kumar would do like blackface, because he also does like yellow face later on in Chidiya Khana for Satyajit Ray. But, that's a whole other conversation. But this particular staging of Othello, that's where he and Rina fall in love during this particular staging. And apparently, like, all the girl wanted was a little bit of, light strangling, and that was it. Like, she's totally in love with him. So this particular part of the film was apparently directed by Utpal Dutt.
Yeah. And he dubs for Uttam Kumar as well.
Which I understand why, because Uttam Kumar, like I've said before, he invented mumblecore, and he just can't help but like mumble. Which is, by the way, like, that's not meant to be like, it's not a slam. Like, I actually do appreciate the way he mumbles his Bengali, because it sounds very conversational. It sounds very lived in. It sounds very authentic. But you don't want to mumble your way through Shakespeare. Like, that's not a thing.
You have to project, right? Yeah.
She is voiced by Jennifer Kendall Kapoor.
Right.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is someone who grew up in India doing Shakespeare, and this is what she came out with.
Yep.
Then heaven have mercy on me. That's what she says. Oh my god. Oh dear.
Yeah, it's a very weird scene, and I don't really know why they had the scene in the first place. Like,
yeah, good question.
I keep trying to understand why, like, in context, like, what is the purpose of that scene? Is it that he just gets his hands on her for the first time and like that's their first point of contact?
Yeah, that's his way in.
But why Othello? Why that scene? Like, why not Romeo and Juliet? Why not?
Why not Romeo and Juliet like Karan Johar, you know? Just to keep things contemporary.
I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand why they had that scene or why people really love it, or like it's clearly something that has a great deal of cultural significance. It's just that nobody's ever been able to explain it adequately to me. I keep hearing about it and I'm just like, okay, and I just don't have the answer. So if there's anybody out there who knows why this was like why this has like such a sacred place in Bengali pop culture history, then I would love to hear from you.
No, I think it's quite redundant also in the narrative because they have the mixed doubles tennis competition after that when he lets her win. And she's like, she finds out and she's angry about it. How can he like let me win? And then she goes to confront him and then he is aware, she gets the letter that his mom passes away. So those two moments let them bond even further. And then a couple of months later, he gets the medical certificate and everything, and they do the song and they're finally together, you know? So it's kind of, I don't know why the Othello scene was required other than let's do Shakespeare in the park, you know?
My guess, pure guess, please don't think that I know this, is that perhaps either watching and or even performing Shakespeare, at least readings in a classroom setting, are some kind of part of Bhadralok education, so that people in the audience for this film initially would have related to maybe even particularly that play for some reason, like that they have performed it themselves in some way or other or been part of an audience for it. Or that it is a marker of a certain kind of education, a certain kind of of social class, of intellectual class, and stuff like that. So I can see why Shakespeare, but that still doesn't answer the question of why Othello and why that scene from Othello in particular.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, you know, the fact that she's an Anglo-Indian and she's a Christian, and the movie doesn't do to her what a lot of, like, for example, Hindi movies do to their Christian or Anglo-Indian characters, which is just turn them into like caricatures. But it does do things with her that I feel like are related to the fact that she is an Anglo-Indian and she is a Christian, you know, the decision to turn her into an alcoholic, and the fact that, you know, the first time that she shows up at his door wearing a sari, and she's very clear that she's wearing it for him. And then when his dad comes to lean on her, she surprises him by being able to understand Bengali. Like, I feel like these are all like tiny, and the fact that she was first dating this white guy called Clayton, and she's clearly like more at home, with white people than she is with Bengalis, and she keeps calling him like all these racial slurs when they first meet. So there's like all this stuff going on, but there's a sense of like incompleteness. Like, the movie has all these things that are dispersed through it, but it never quite brings them together to make a statement about something, or even to inform anything about these characters, I feel, in a very real way. So it's just sort of left there for you to react to it. And maybe that's sort of cultural coding. And if you were a 1950s, 1960s Bengali person watching this movie, you would understand the context, in a way that the three of us don't, and don't need that stuff to be brought together in a narrative sense. But to me, like, it just seems like wasted material.
Do you not think it has to do, it underscores the sacrifices that are being made? To me, that's what it's about. That he's willing to renounce his, he calls himself an atheist. His father is super Hindu. So like the faith that he was raised in or affiliated with or whatever, he's willing to sacrifice that. She's willing to run away from her own family eventually, So I think those things are coding just how many choices these people have to make in a way that supports their romantic union.
The elegant suffering, as we call it again. Yeah.
I feel like the suffering is actually kicked off by her rather than him, because he makes it very clear that it doesn't really matter to him whether he changes his religion or not, because he's just like, yeah, like, I'm a Hindu and I'm an atheist, then I'll be a Christian and an atheist. Like, it doesn't make any difference to me. And she's the one with principles, and she's the one who's like, no, like, we can't do that to you. And I think like conversion is again like a topic that, I mean, it's a pretty big topic in India right now for the Hindu right wing. And I think it must have been like just as big of a deal in Bengal at the time, because Bengal saw all these reform movements, and they had,
the missionaries as well.
And they had a lot of these reform movements that were actually in reaction to Christianity and their contact with Christianity. So, you know, they're a culture who have spent quite a lot of time talking about like religion and religious reform and conversion and stuff like that. So the idea that her father would want him to convert to Christianity and the fact that he's an atheist, those are definitely cultural coded scenes. But sitting here in 2020, I'm not exactly sure what those cultural codes are, is what I'm saying.
What I don't understand is the sequence of events in that. Did he convert to Christianity just to spite his own father, or
isn't it that her father has said, you can marry my daughter if you convert, and she doesn't want him to make that sacrifice, but he's like Amrita said, I'll be a Christian atheist instead. And clearly it takes root, because when we meet him in the beginning, he's wearing a clerical collar. He is a faith professional of some kind. He's like an Anglican priest or something.
Oh, yeah. So the nurse in the end, who's a nun, she refers to him as Reverend Mukherjee. Yeah. So, I mean, what I don't understand is, I guess, what made him convert then? Because he was clearly not getting married to Reena.
So I thought that he had already converted when she told him that she wasn't marrying him.
He was late.
Yeah, I feel like...
or too early.
When is that scene of him sitting outside on the grass outside that huge church in Calcutta? When does that happen? Because that to me is one of the images I hold in my head of that film. I think just because it's aesthetically pleasing to me. But when does that happen? Because it's got that towering background.
So he is like quite depressed about things. Yeah. So that's when the fathers, the Krishna Hindu's father and Reena have met, and when he goes to meet her, she gaslights him basically. Like, how can you convert a religion for a woman? And yeah, that pretty much ends their relationship in the college times, and then they go their separate ways, and she becomes this alcoholic, but yet she's a medical professional as well. And then he becomes a reverend, and then their paths converge sometime in the future, and sometime in the I don't know 1940s, and then what happens after that? So they start talking to each other about their past, the ways that they have led their lives in the past, and he tries to sort of make her understand that religion is integral to a person's identity, and she says she has no religion, and she has had no religion or identity when she was born, because she then has the reveal of the story of her mother, which is one, like, this is the point where I go, this movie is banana pants, you know. Like, what was the point of that story? Like, that particular subplot.
We're going to talk about it. You should tell the audience.
Okay, so the reveal is basically that she gets to realize, she after denouncing Krishnendu as her husband, she says that I'm going to become a nun and I'm going to pursue religion. And her father says, like, how can you be a nun when you were born without any religion? And she was like, I'm so shocked. What are you talking about, Dad? And he's like, the maid that has been taking care of you for so long, she's your mother. And she's totally outraged. And she's like, you got to marry my mom today and announce to the world that, you know, what her real identity is. And then he shoots her.
Her being the mother, not Suchitra.
I mean, he was trying to shoot the daughter, and the mother comes in the way in the most melodramatic way, dodging, the bullet for her and taking the bullet for her. That's when I went banana pants. So what was the whole point about this subplot?
My thought is that, again, this is setting up, obviously it's setting up things for them to overcome in their own thought processes and their own conception of self. And I guess the film is saying that in the end, you can be anyone. It doesn't matter. And what matters are the choices that you make as you go forward. And I think at least in the version of the upload, I was able to get to play. By the way, there's no good upload of this film anywhere, especially not with subtitles. There used to be a good subtitled one on the Angel Digital channel. It is no more, so good luck trying to watch this movie. When the film closes, they are walking into the background of the film, right? They're walking with their backs to us ahead.
Yeah.
And maybe those are the 7 steps, right? that they are moving forward, and that is what matters, not any sense of the identity that you may or may not have been born with. What matters is the choices that you make, which is a lovely idea. If that's what they're after, I like that.
Yeah. I have a question about the ending. I know that we briefly touched upon this in our private correspondence, but what happens at the end? Is it a happy ending or is it not? Because I could swear, like, when I first saw this movie, I was completely certain that the two of them get together at the end somehow. And then you guys started talking and I was like, wait, is that not what happens? Like,
My theory is like he convinces her to convert into a nun, and they're walking towards the church. I don't even know at this point.
That would be the worst. So if he's an Anglican vicar, then or an Anglican priest, he's allowed to marry.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know.
Correct.
She's too alcoholic for him, so maybe not.
I honestly think the church is there in the background of the very final frames. Unlike the church in the scene I was mentioning before, I think that one is sort of just visually pleasant and to mark sort of some sort of point on that path that they appear to be going on. I mean, it's too bad it's not a hospital or something, because that's where they need to go. But
seven steps to the hospital.
7 steps to 12 steps, my friend. What do we think about her alcoholism? I think that's really interesting. Again, I feel like we don't see many heroines who hit the bottle so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, she's she's got sort of a Devdas wallowing sort of deal going on, but wallowing in while also serving people, which of course Devdas would never do. They still let her be, quote unquote, worthy of this idealistic romantic partner, even though she's an alcoholic. That's amazing.
I think she couldn't take the mom's death, like, other than Krishnendu denouncing Krishnendu's love in her life, and then the mother realizing who her mother is, and the mother dying, she just couldn't take it. Like, fuck this, I'm gonna drink.
That's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
I will say that Suchitra Sen's portrayal of a drunk person is miles better than what most of her male contemporaries were doing at the time. But I also think the choice to show her as an alcoholic has to do with the fact that she's Christian and Anglo-Indian.
Yes.
Yeah. So any other standout moments that you would like to discuss from Saptapadi?
Can we talk about the merry-go-round song and then the sort of song battle?
Joy Tara, Joy Kali.
When I first watched this film, and she is supposed to be in some kind of either sophisticated or hip or both party where people are singing with a merry-go-round as the metaphor, and they're medical students. I think I actually paused it and was like, wait, what? And I have a theory that whenever you say the words rock and roll in a song, it indicates that you are not at all rock and roll, which is also what's happening here. And then, so that alone really blew my mind. I still don't understand what we're supposed to comprehend about her because of that song, or why that song was, I assume it was written for this film. I don't actually know, but like, I don't understand what's going on there. And then this amazing song battle where he is studying nearby to where this party is, and he comes out, it's a devotional song, right?
Yeah, praising Kalima.
So they're like shout singing at each other. It's a really interesting, again, traditional versus modern, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. But it clearly is this emotional climax, and I think it's a stand-in for you-know-what, but it's pretty amazing. I've never seen a sequence like that in any other Indian film.
I want to just mention, since this is an episode that's all about the Uttam Suchitra chemistry, I just want to mention the way the two of them stare at each other.
So many times.
Yeah, but also, like, I don't think there's a single Indian, like in any of the languages that I've seen, and I've seen like old movies, I've seen new movies, I've seen 80s movies, and I don't think I've ever seen two people stare at each other the way Uttam and Suchitra stare at each other. I mean, you get this feeling that they could just stare at each other for hours, and it almost looks too personal for you to be looking at, which is, I think, the point, like they're so intensely into each other, and they're so involved with each other that you feel like you're intruding on a private moment, and it's incandescent. Like, it is just amazing to watch the two of them together.
The one standout moment is for me in this movie is Uttam Kumar moment, where Suchitra Sen is also in that moment as well. It's when he is trying to convince her about that religion does not matter to him, and he pretty much says, like, forget religion, forget my father's demands, forget all of those, keep them on the side, but can you deny that you're not my woman? And she shies away and hugs him. That was so cute. That was so cute. Reverend Mukherjee knows the ways.
When she's packing his suitcase when he has to go home, there's some tiny little moments in this film of kind of everyday comfortableness that are so magical.
And to bring everyone back to earth, I just want to shout out to the many times that we see Uttam Kumar in the corridors of his college, where he's trying to get from like place A to place B, and there's all these people who are walking in a straight line and refuse to move out of the way, so he's just like bumping into them. And that's just peak Indian culture, and I'm happy to note that 70 years on, nothing has changed. People still behave in the exact same way.
Queuing is not our forte. Baju hat. So that's pretty much what we thought about Saptapadi, I guess. We can move on to the next movie. It's called Chaowa Pawa, a 1959 film directed by the director trio called Jatrik. Beth, do you want to go for the synopsis?
So this is a remake of It Happened One Night. It is changed somewhat, and we'll get into that. And just as a trivia note, this is one of at least 8 Indian remakes of It Happened One Night, which I think is fascinating, and I know Amrita has things to say about that. Suchitra Sen is the daughter of a newspaper publisher, played by, how do you say his name?
Chobi Bishesh.
Who plays Uttam's father in the film we just discussed. And I think we should talk about him because he is a towering presence as a character actor in a lot of these films. He's magnificent.
Oh, yeah.
But so he plays her father in this film. He's a newspaper editor. Uttam works for him unsuccessfully. So he basically fires Uttam at the beginning of the film. He is trying to marry her off to some son of a friend of his out in the boonies somewhere. He takes her on the train because they're going to go visit this friend and like see the plot of land that the dad has bought. The intended groom shows up as a surprise. She's not having it, so she jumps out of the first class compartment she's in and goes to the back of the train, and that's where Uttam is, and they meet cute and they go through the various modes of transport going across the countryside as you see in It Happened One Night. There is no hitchhiking leg scene, just so you know. They did not try to set that into the 1950s Bengali context, unfortunately.
I don't think Suchitra would have agreed to that.
No, I'm sure not. A ponytail is one thing, but a leg is too far. And meanwhile, her father has posted a reward in the newspaper for 10,000 rupees. And so Uttam is trying to decide what to do about that while also protecting them from other people trying to find out who she is and get that money. They first stay in a small sort of rundown hotel. The hotelier there is played by a man whose name I forget, but he is in Porosh Patar by Ray, and he's also a delightful character actor.
They keep calling him a Chokotti.
Yes. Of course, this whole time they're pretending they're married. They go to one of Uttam's friend's house where they start to realize some feels. And then Suchitra writes to a friend and says she's going to go stay with her friend. And eventually her father reappears and things happen.
Yeah, pretty much. So question 1. How much is 10,000 rupees in 1959 convert to 2020 money? Does anybody have an idea?
Yeah, that is a good question.
About inflation and everything?
No. I will look it up while you talk.
So, question for Amrita to start with. How do you compare the two Suchitras? What the Reena Brown from Saptapadi versus Manju Chaudhary from Chawapawa?
So they're actually both very sassy, right? They're both like little spitfires, and they're just both, troublemakers, and they're both strong-willed, and they won't take shit from anybody. But I feel like Saptapadi, it really ends up punishing Reena for her agency. But in this one, there's all these scenes where Uttam is, oh my God. Okay, first of all, I just have to mention that Uttam in this film is delicious.
Yeah, second.
Beth sent me a text where she was just like, Uttam in this movie, and then heart eyes, heart eyes, heart eyes. That is so right. He's just beautiful in this movie, like young Uttam Kumar.
Okay, do I let you have a moment?
Wait, it gets much worse. There's like all these points where he's smoking in the film, and I literally have it in my notes where I'm just like, hot dad sexy energy. He just really does it for me in this film.
What is life? What is faith?
So there's like points in this film where Suchitra, not being a dummy, looks at all this gorgeousness, and she's just like, rawr. And he's like, wait, you know that this is all play acting, right? Like we're not actually married. And that's another thing, by the way, like Uttam does the fake marriage trope really well. And I really enjoy watching that in movies. And, I don't think anybody does it better than, Uttam, to be honest, because he's, like in Ek Raat and, Naika Sangbad. I'm butchering the pronunciation of all these movies. I'm sorry, but they're like delightful. And, like Uttam has to keep reminding her that this is play acting and they're not actually married. And she's like, yeah, but I really like this play acting. And she knows what she wants, and she's like really into it, and she's really into him, and she doesn't make a secret out of it. Like she's not coy about it. She's very vocal about the fact that she finds him attractive.
I love that. Don't you?
Yeah, I do. It's so much.
It's so refreshing.
And it's something that I don't really find in movies even today. And from like 1959, that's just revolutionary. And I really liked that for her as a character, you know. And I think the movie gives her like a happy ending at the end of it, and not an ambiguous one as we find in Saptapadi, which is like, you will be a nun, and we'll like look at each other in the church courtyard.
I mean, in the end, she gets her agency. Like, what you gonna do? I'm gonna hug you, and you can't leave. You know?
Yeah. But I really enjoy Suchitra Sen's character in this movie. Like, she's just so light and airy and fun and strong-willed, and like there's a tendency for this character to be shrill and annoying in some of the other adaptations, and Suchitra is neither. Like, she's fun and she's feisty, and I really enjoy her.
She's also violent.
Oh yeah, but her violence is limited to like the cups and saucers, you know.
I haven't seen It Happened One Night in, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years. I don't remember if that's in the original, but the throwing things is a really interesting touch, because I feel like it makes her. We were talking last time about one of her characters seeming like not unstable but unpredictable, and that's really ramped up in this one. Like, she does almost hit people in the face with crockery.
And her servants are clearly terrified of her too. They're all just like, oh no.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that whole arc is also beautiful of how her transformation takes place. Like, before, it comes to her as second nature that if she's angry, she will throw the nearest thing that's next to her. And then by the end, she's almost like, you know, in this play of being a couple, she's like wearing the gungat and everything, and she's thinking twice before throwing, but she still has like agency over her. Like,
I'm feeling like it could come off as a Taming of the Shrew sort of thing, but that is not how it felt to me while I was watching it. It felt like maturity.
Yeah.
She's always supposed to be like the spoiled princess. Like, that's the that's the vibe that you get.
Yeah.
Just before when she goes to Jahanabad to meet Meeta, right? She thinks that she's going to meet Meeta, and by this time, this is probably the final scene, the setting for the final scene, and you would think that she must have been tamed by now, but no, she's like, where are the servants to take my luggage? And she throws it around. Where's everybody? Where am I going to keep my luggage?
But also, you know, like, there's like so many tiny details that Suchitra brings to this role. Like, but you were saying about like her putting on the ghungat. I giggled so hard, like every time she did that, because she has this look on her face where she's just like a little girl just playing dress up, where she's like, oh, I'm now going to be a married woman. And then she puts the pallu over her head. And it's such a mockery of the entire thing. Like, it just cracks me up. It's just funny.
Uttam is trying to plot this, right? And for when he is like, oh, the second or the third time, he's like, gungat, do it again. And she was like, no, never. I will never do it.
And I was also like, this time around when I was watching the train scene where she's like running away from her intended, I actually wrote in my notes, you know, like, that guy doesn't know how lucky he is to have had that escape, because she...
And he took his ring.
Yeah.
He seems overwhelmed by her even in the train car, right?
Yeah.
He's like, there's a moment where his eyes get kind of big, like, oh.
So her father says, right, why did you throw away the newspaper? And she says, I wanted to scream but couldn't, so threw away the newspaper instead.
That resonates. I know she's rich, but she's still a woman in the 1950s.
I think the other point that I wanted to make is that the folly part of our Tolly Folly comes from the sound of money coins when Rajat reads the advert.
Yes!
Like, what is that? You know? Do we need a cue? That he's he's like seeing dollar signs in his
And
head.
it goes on for a while too. It's not like, he hears a few tinkling coins. It's like, no.
Yeah.
For the next 2 minutes, we're just going to hear like coins tinkling.
And that happens like 3 times across the movie.
I mean, it's showing his ongoing moral tension over what he should be doing, because it's been established that he is jobless and broke. And she doesn't even think about his ability to pay for everything that they're doing, because she, of course, has no money with her.
पैसे तो होंगे सबके पास.
I think it's sort of weaving in and out really well over, her expectations, because she doesn't even stop to think about it. And I think people could probably make different arguments about when it is in the film that he decides he's not in it. He's not going to take the money.
Yeah, I think it's like literally in the climax where, because when Suchitra Sen is disappointed in you as a human being, you are disappointed in yourself as a human being. Because that is just some serious contempt. But you kind of see him fight himself, like his better nature fight, his baser nature.
Yeah.
And also like, he's not a bad person. Like the fact that he's taking her home, like that's all he's doing. And he can clearly see that she's not equipped for a world outside. Like she's sassy and I like her, but she's a bit of an idiot and she doesn't know anything about anything. She doesn't know how anything works. She just ran away without money.
She's Papa ki pari.
Yeah, basically. And he can see that, she's basically lost in the world if, she doesn't go back home or she doesn't have somebody to support her and like help her. So he's not doing anything intrinsically bad. The only thing is that it becomes a bit more gray because she falls in love with him. And he falls in love with her as well, because who wouldn't fall in love with Suchitra in this movie? Because she's just amazingly fun and just beautiful.
So let's talk about It Happens One Night in the context of Chawapawa. Like what makes It Happens One Night so repeatedly translated into Indian cinema?
So my theory is that it plays really well to certain established tropes like character tropes in the Indian imagination, which is you have this boorish hero who's like very manly and like very will stand up to a woman and like be a bit of a flirt and a bit of a smooth talker and like that kind of stuff. And then it also has a female heroine who is very unlike the usual Madonna types that we see as heroines in Indian films. So she's actually like a fun character. She has personality. She has opinions. She has agency. And it allows for an interesting dynamic to develop where the audience can see these two banter and bicker and it's fun. But at the end of it, she transforms into, in most adaptations, she transforms into like a good wife, basically.
Dulhan, yeah.
She's not too out there. It's not like they're running away to live in sin or anything, but, and he's a good person. So, like the two of them are fine.
Yeah. Intrinsically, yes.
So it just allows so it's not like that foreign an idea. And also like, and this is my bias talking 100%, but the fake marriage trope is fun. Like it just allows so many different situations to develop that are fraught with sexual tension. But also, because we've established that the hero, however much of a smart aleck he might be, is also a good person, like she's not at risk. So it just allows you to enjoy those situations rather than be afraid for her.
I think I really enjoyed the fact that, when Rajat calls Manju as Jharna, and she really likes it, she likes that identity of being married as Jharna to this Rajat guy. And yeah, I totally get it, like why she is so much, besotted in love by this guy. What do you think, Beth?
I'm sure at some point some of these remakes are remakes of the first Indian iterations, not of, right, It Happened One Night. So someone's remaking Chori Chori. They're not remaking It Happened One Night. And you'd have to watch all of them to really find those threads, I think. What's interesting to me is that it's over 20 years before the first of these appears, as far as I could discover from Wikipedia and IMDb, which is so that, It Happened One Night was this huge smash in the mid 30s, and it's not until the 50s that Chori Chori comes out. So I'm wondering if it is so resonant, there's clearly something different happening in time. That's not a judgment, like history is different in different places. It finds a footing at a certain point and then is established. And at least one of these is made since 2000. So it's not like it's gone away completely. And to do it now, obviously cell phones and stuff make some of the twists of this plot a lot harder to do. As I'm talking about this, I'm feeling a little bit like Harry Met Sejal has a little bit of this element to it. And, there's various sort of road trippy movies that have elements of this to it. And I don't want to besmirch It Happened One Night or any of its good remakes with When Harry Met Sejal. But I think we can see echoes of it in other places too, still. And that's probably true of American films too, right? I'm not saying it's unique to India.
What bothers me, though, that It Happened One Night is it was released when? 1934. And in 2013, it went through the digital restoration. We have a Criterion Collection Blu-ray release. It was scanned from 4K. It's been restored and everything. And we don't have any such things for any of the remakes. All we have is Shemaru release of Chori Chori, which is terrible, and then nothing of the Bengali movies.
It's probably because that film stock doesn't exist, right? They don't have the material to work with.
Yeah.
To make it. It's not that nobody wants to make it. It's that they don't have the raw material to do. Sometimes. I'm sure that's not true all the time, but that's a real problem.
I'm just begging any Bengalis who are listening to this podcast to just do something, I don't it's just so unfathomable to me when I watch these movies because they're so amazing. And clearly, the love of them hasn't disappeared because if you go to YouTube and you see the scenes that are posted or the songs.
And the comments under it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's people from Bangladesh and from Bengal who still really connect to these stories and to these films and to the people who played these characters. And so the love of the fans has never ended. And there's new generations coming up who discover these movies and fall in love with them. For the love of God, clean it up a little bit. Put in some subtitles. It's not that difficult. I mean, we used to know people Beth and I knew people who used to do it for a hobby, and just put in a tiny bit of cash and clean up the print so that people can watch it. We're not asking for too much. It's just a little bit of effort.
So here's a fact. The It Happened One Night print was cleaned and digitally treated at Prasad Studios in Hyderabad.
Can you believe it?
Wow.
So, and the legal copy, the digital streamable copy of Saptapadi that I watched was on Boneflix, which is terrible. It has a giant thumbnail of databazaar.media or whatever on the right-hand side. There are no subtitles. And you know what? If I want to resume the movie from where I left, it doesn't allow me to do so. So I have to remember. Yeah, so these are the obstacles that we have to go through, the elegant suffering that we have to go through to watch these movies.
I just want to echo what Amrita said, which is that these movies are lovely. They are fascinating. They have beautiful music. They have wonderful performances. They have humor that translates well, I think, because I find them funny and I clearly don't know Bengali. I'm not saying this is anyone's fault, but it is a loss to us all who like Indian cinema that these films are not more available. Yeah. And I really wish they were, because I think people who haven't seen them already would really like them. And if any of you want recommendations, please tweet at me. I'm very happy to share what I've seen and point to where I think you can find it. The Angel Digital YouTube channel is a treasure trove, although it oddly does not have Saptapadi on it at all, let alone with subtitles.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge, but you can find things, and they are really, really wonderful. And if you're just interested in some of the Hindi films of the same decade, you've got a lot of people who are going back and forth between the two industries. You've got a lot of Bengali stories that are being adapted into Hindi. You've got a lot of technicians who are Bengali going and working in Bombay. So there are connections to the thing you already know and love that are really interesting.
So like I'm sure that it's fair that Ray's movies are picked up by Criterion Collection and they're remastered, but we are definitely missing out if there is no remastering of these old works that are from the not so art cinema, quote unquote, section of Bengali cinema in the 1950s and the 60s. We are missing out on the commercial side of Uttam Kumar, what he did with all his brilliant timing and brooding, as Amrita said. Speaking of which do you prefer between the two? The Uttam Suchitra of Saptapadi versus Uttam Suchitra in Chaowa Pawa?
Oh, this one. 100%. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. This is my favorite of their pairings that I have seen. I feel like the sort of iterations of their chemistry that you get in this film, for me, are just the most pleasurable, the most fun, the most... yeah, they're super entertaining. They really play to their strengths as comedians. Amrita
said that Uttam Kumar, and you said as well that in the newsroom scene, delicious, as you said, and and Suchitra Sen is just firecracker in this movie. She's brilliant. I absolutely love it.
I really enjoy the fact that in this movie, like he's playing like this guy who's like, oh yeah, like I'm a man of the world. I know what's up. Like you just stick with me, kid. But like the moment they're alone together, she is absolutely sexually dominant. Like she's just bringing all this sexual tension and he does not know what to do with it. And I mean the character, like he's just like, wait, like that's not what's happening here. And she's like, I love you. I want you. I totally sex you up.
You gotta tell me by this evening, or no, never gonna happen.
It's just really funny to me because, like, she's making all these overtures to him, and he's just like sort of mincing away, and he's just like, nope, that's not what we're about. Remember, I'm just taking you places. We're not a thing. And she's like, yes, we are. Look, and it's really funny because that.
And then in the end of the film, she's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. What I also love is the banter between them. Like in the beginning, when they rent the first sort of inn from Chakotti, and she's like, I've explained you my situation very well. I hope you don't take. I hope you won't try to take advantage of it. And he says, that means you'll take all the advantages, and if you're required, you will misbehave with me as well.
Also feel like the suffering that you see in this film, like, and it's just a tiny bit where they're suffering, like when, they have their little fights in the middle where, she's like, why don't you love me? And he's like, I don't know how to tell you that, but I just want the money. But he also wants her. So they're like all conflicted. And then at the end,
No, he also says, like, I am a panoti. Like, I've been born with very bad stars. When I go to the train station, the train leaves 5 minutes early. That's an actual line in the movie.
But also like at the end, where she's disappointed in him and she's just like, get out of my sight. And then he's like listening to the coins tinkle. And the two of them are just like heartbroken in separate rooms. But the suffering in this movie to me is so much more effective than the suffering in Saptapadi. Just because in Saptapadi is just like, it's a very dramatic, very studied kind of suffering. It's just it's very classical suffering, if you want to call it something, it's like it's an art form of suffering. Whereas here, you've seen these two be so natural with each other, and you kind of see them be almost like I said, they're so real with each other and the tension that they share. And you believe in them so much as a couple that when you think that they might be separated because of misunderstandings, your heart really breaks for them, because you're like, no,
you're meant to be together.
Get back together and kiss, The number of times that when I watch this movie that I'm just like, now kiss, like I just scream at the screen like all the time.
I had the realization when he realizes that he's going to give up on the money, and that is, I don't know if he meant to keep his watch and not spin so that he couldn't tell the time, and she misses the train. That's what I sort of read that scene as.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I bet you're right.
So, any more scenes that you want to discuss about Chawapawa?
I want to give a little attention to how they meet on the train, because they're in a crowded compartment, and they're both sleeping, and she's kind of leaning on him, and I was like, that just sets up exactly how the relationship is for the rest of the thing. And of course, like, he ends up paying for her ticket and blah blah blah. And there's an older gentleman on the other side of him who basically says, like, what's with her? And Uttam is like, you don't even want to know.
It's like Uttam deals with these kind of ladies on a daily basis,
Like this again.
To everybody out there, like, if you want to watch a fun Uttam Kumar movie, you need to search out the ones where he's doing the fake marriage trope, whether it's this one or Naika Sangbad or Iktirat or any of those, because he is delightful in each and every one of them.
That's the episode of Tolly Folly. Beth, where can people find you?
I am on Beth Loves Bali at Twitter. And also, if you want to read more about any of these films from me, you can go to the Bengali tab on my blog, BethLovesBollywood.com.
Amrita, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at AmritaIQ, or you can find me on YouTube, where I talk about books, at Amrita by the Book.
And I'm Sujoy. I'm at 9E3K on Twitter and Instagram. This is the second episode of the Tolly Folly podcast. You can find us on you podcasting streams and on YouTube. Just search for Tolly Folly. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time. See ya.